Well, this is Deep Green Philosophy. The goal of my executive summary, and I wasn't ready for how big this really is to improve upon Professor Richard Wolff's presentation by adding in background knowledge and clarifying assumptions that will help ordinary people better connect the dots. I took artistic license in trying to improve the clarity of this content and made editorial changes as I thought necessary. Remember, what is common knowledge or intuitive to an intellectual like Richard Wolff may not be obvious to Joe Everyman or Jane Everyman. If you want to listen to the original, tune into Chasing Sharp. Trump's ceasefire is a shell game. He signed a ceasefire in the Middle East without the United States stopping the provision of weapons and materials to Israel, and without a provision that European nations stop providing weapons and materials to Israel. This is a bizarre situation. There's a war between Ukraine and Russia. In order for the war to end, a negotiation would need to take place between Ukraine and Russia. We now have 3 parties involved when you include the United States. This is like going on an important date and bringing an additional friend along. This isn't what you and your date had in mind unless you are into something different from the mainstream. Mr. Zelensky has said 50 times that he doesn't want a ceasefire. Putin has said that he doesn't want a ceasefire. Putin put out a statement that the Ukrainians want the Europeans to be somewhat involved. It's not that the United States agreed that Ukraine should be allied with the Europeans. The United States' silence shows that the United States does not want the Europeans involved in aiding Ukraine. How does the United States expect to negotiate the end to a war in Europe without the participation of the Europeans? It poses more questions than it answers. The United States hastily put a conference together. The Russians don't want to give the Ukrainians the opportunity to regroup or rearm. The United States hastily put a conference together in Saudi Arabia to give the illusion of progress. The Russians will use a ceasefire as an opportunity to regroup and rearm if the ceasefire is not linked to a settlement. Ukraine has the biggest problem here. Ukraine, they are the ones that are destroyed. Ukraine has an electrical system that is highly damaged. Russia was able to reclaim the Donbass. Ukraine has lost millions in population that will likely never return to Ukraine. Between the war and the emigration of the Ukrainian people, Ukraine does not have a functioning economy. The United States has been paying the salary of the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian civilian employees. How will these salaries be paid once the United States withdraws their support in the future? What will happen with the eastern part of Ukraine, given its complicated relationship to the Soviet Union? The number one issue that Russia would not tolerate in the 8-hour negotiation between Russia and Ukraine was Russia's perceived assault against the Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine. Crimea and Donbass and the 4 oblast regions of eastern Ukraine were not discussed, which would lead us to conclude that Russia wants that territory back. How are negotiations going to be conducted that don't discuss the territorial dispensations of those regions after a war, ostensibly a war that was fought over those possessions? If they hadn't agreed on anything during the ceasefire, that's a recipe to return back to square one. When the war resumes, what possible benefit will that have to anyone? The history of people invading Ukraine, the history of people invading Russia, is one loser after another. Dmitry Orlov made similar comments. Napoleon invaded Russia and was defeated. Hitler invaded Russia and was defeated. There's enough memory at West Point, at least among the history professors, to know that messing with Russia isn't going to work out for you. Some people think we can beat Russia if we combine the United States with the European Union and give the Ukrainians weapons and hit the Russians with sanctions. Suddenly, Western Europe stopped buying Russian oil and gas, which is what the Russian economy depends on. That was a big blow against Russia. The neoconservatives in Washington, including Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, they were confident that the sanctions war by the United States and Europe would win the day and would bring Russia to its knees. Washington and Blinken thought that the sanctions would make the Russian ruble valueless. None of that happened. The Russian ruble didn't collapse. Russia's economic growth during the 3 years of war is greater than that of the United States. Russia has not been crippled and has basically won the war against Ukraine. Mr. Trump and American officials acknowledge that Russia has basically won the war against Ukraine. Unfortunately for Mr. Trump, his tariffs are likely going to have the same level of effectiveness as the sanctions war against Russia, which was nothing. Trump's tariff war against other nations the United States doesn't like will fail. A tariff is a unilateral act. It is the economic equivalent of someone who used to play nicely as a child, who used to share his trucks in the sandbox. The child suddenly turns around, grabs a stick, and hits everybody to do what he wants. The child becomes a bully. The 25% tariff that was levied against Canada and Mexico, which are the nations that the United States signed the North American Free Trade Agreement with by Bill Clinton in the 1990s. In the first presidency of Donald Trump, from 2016 to 2020, Trump signed the treaty that extended NAFTA. The central provision of that treaty was that 3 countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, would have no tariffs between them, and that anything produced between them could be sent to another without tax. It was called the North American Free Trade Agreement because it eliminated tariffs between the 3 countries. Now, Mr. Trump, unilaterally, without conversation with America's 2 largest trading partners, and without diplomatic exchanges, violated the treaty that bears Trump's personal signature. Trump breaks treaties once or twice a day. It will have long-term consequences. Any company planning to do business in the United States, or in Canada, or in Mexico, used to be able to count on producing something in one country and being able to sell the product in the 2 other countries without a tariff. It's becoming risky for countries to do business with the United States of America. With more or less concern that Trump is breaking treaties with the same amount of attention that an ordinary person gives to whether they will apply more or less cream cheese to their bagel. It is not wise for the United States to be functioning like this in an interdependent world economy. Trump justifies his behavior by saying that tariffs will bring back American jobs. It's unlikely that jobs will come back to the United States, as the last 12 American presidents have promised that, and it hasn't come to pass. What that suggests is that the reasons people produce goods outside of the United States are more powerful than whatever American presidents can do. Why should we believe Trump when his predecessors, both Republican and Democratic, couldn't achieve this goal? If you are a producer and are confronted with a tariff, a tax on imports, that is going to be a frustrating situation. For 100 years, the Republican Party, or GOP, has defined itself as the party that opposes taxes. The GOP promised voters and the business community that they'll cut your taxes. The only significant economic policy Trump passed in his first term was tax cuts. Now the GOP is the party of tariffs. Mr. Trump celebrates tariffs. The tariff is a tax. We're watching the Republican Party reverse a 100-year history and become the party of taxes. It is as if the GOP wants to sneak this by the American public. While the GOP used to be against taxes, the GOP supports the biggest tax increases in the world. Mr. Trump tells us if he puts a tax on Chinese goods, capitalist corporations will bring back jobs to the United States. The number one reason corporations won't bring jobs back to the United States is because moving production is very expensive. Moving production involves moving supply chains and takes years to accomplish. Corporations would have to worry that Mr. Trump, who put the 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, may change his mind if he would take it back 3 days later. No capitalist is going to incur the cost of moving production back to the United States when you can't count on what Trump will do. Capitalists left the United States and moved production overseas, and this included thousands of capitalists moving production overseas over a 30-year period between 1980 and 2010, 2012. Moving overseas took decades. The number one reason capitalists left the United States and moved production overseas is that producing goods in India or China requires low wages that the workers require. It is very unlikely that a capitalist would relocate to the United States, even if an American president encouraged them to. Relocating to a high-wage environment is the opposite of what capitalists ever do. In business school, business leaders are taught to go where wages you pay are low and where the market is growing. The biggest, fastest growing market in the world is the People's Republic of China. The American capitalists went to China to take advantage of low wages and an expanding market. If capitalists were to bring jobs back to the United States, other countries would be upset and would impose a retaliatory tariff. China is imposing tariffs in response to the tariffs that the United States imposed. In all likelihood, Trump's tariffs will be as successful as the sanctions war that was imposed against Russia. After World War II, Japan and Germany focused on automotive production to try to compete with the American automotive production market. Japan and Germany thought dominating in automotive production was a task that they should focus on, and that succeeding in automotive production would be their measure of success. They attempted to produce a better car at a lower price. Volkswagen was originally Hitler's car. Over in the United States, Detroit was an American success story. Foreign dignitaries would be flown from Washington, D.C. to Detroit to have them look at the Ford or General Motors or Chrysler plant. American presidents would show off satisfied workers, a significant portion of African American workers, focusing on how the United States was overcoming its racial issues. There was a horror that Volkswagen would undo American dominance because they had a cheaper car at a better price. The Japanese developed cheaper cars soon thereafter. A deal was struck. Europeans wanted to protect their chicken production against American lower quality but cheaper chicken production. A tariff was attached to the pickup truck, 25%. That tariff has been in effect for 50 years. Why is the American pickup truck a symbol of masculinity? You had to train the American buffoon to want that truck. The profit margin on a pickup truck is significantly better than the profit margin on a standard car. Toyota finally built a pickup truck in the United States in order to escape a tariff. Tariffs have been around for hundreds of years. The effect of a tariff depends on the context in which it is set. According to Dr. Richard Wolff, Nobody can be certain of the effect of a tariff will be. And surely, Trump is unsure what the effect of a tariff will be. The tariff policy could work out for Trump if he is lucky. Any half-wit economist knows that a tariff could lead to serious inflation for American consumers. Starbucks will need to pay 25% more for coffee beans, which will go up in price. Sugar is an important product. Think the working class is angry now? Trump won partly because of antipathy towards the Democrats for causing inflation during the Biden presidency. The United States is deporting millions of undocumented people back to Mexico. What is in Mexico for them? There are no jobs for them in Mexico. There won't be any jobs in Mexico for millions of people who are suddenly arriving. Those millions of Mexicans who are working in the United States and sending money back to their family in Mexico accounted for 18% of the gross domestic product of Mexico. Return the workers for whom there is no work and cut off their source of income. This is disastrous for Mexico. Canada sells lumber to the United States. If nobody can afford to build houses in the United States, now, wait till it costs 25% more. Half of the United States, particularly people in the Midwest, use electricity from Canada. Canada has oil and gas and can generate massive amounts of electricity. What is Canada going to do with its lumber? Its gas. They can sell to the People's Republic of China, which is a genuine competitor to the United States for the first time. And this is a summary of I Wasn't Ready for How Big This Really Is by Professor Richard Wolff. I hope this was helpful. I look forward to your questions and comments.